everyone. Glad to see some of you back for this breakout session titled A Fair Transition from Vision to Reality, Ensuring an Inclusive Transition for All. We've heard it yesterday, we've heard it today. The green transition is bringing transformative changes to the way we live, move, and work. And with this panel, we will discuss concrete ways forward to promote these fair transitions. Before I introduce our distinguished panelists and get into the Q&A part, there's actually two very interactive elements that we're playing with those joining us online. We would like to get your inputs and feedback and then show the results right afterwards. So I'm going to ask two rounds of questions, not just to our panelists, but also to you. And here's the first questions I'm going to ask to everybody joining us online via Slido. Perhaps we can have it up. It goes, which groups are the most vulnerable in the green transition context, and what are the specific challenges? There you have it. Which groups do you consider the most vulnerable? Yes, in the green transition. So you can start voting on that. We will show you the results as we go along. But without further ado, we have a great panel assembled for you here. First up, she's the president of the Global Forum on Sustainable Energy and the co-founder and president of the Global Women's Networks for the Energy Transition, Irene Ginner-Reichel. Great to have you with us. We also have with us the Secretary General of Solidar, Michael Lei. He will tell us more about what Solidar is all about. Miriam Duo, she is a climate advisor and steering group member of Equinox, an initiative for racial justice. Another aspect I'm looking forward to hearing more about. Julia Walgreen is joining us. She's a director at the European Anti-Poverty Network. And last but certainly not least, joining us is Carlos Tapia, the Senior Research Fellow at Nord Regio. Welcome to you all. Let's dive right in. Irene, we're talking in this very specific panel about concrete ways forward to promote fair transitions. What, according to your working and personal experience, is the way forward here?
Well, the way forward is to make sure that the process of the transition is participatory and that it is inclusive and that it leaves no one behind. That's obviously very easy said and not so easy done. And my organization, the organization that I represent here, the Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition, is specifically concerned about the situation of women in this transition. Now, we don't think of women as victims, but of agents of change. But we need to recognize at the same time that women are underrepresented in the current energy sector. And women are also exposed to great vulnerabilities because of the ongoing discrimination against women in all societies to the effects of climate change. Climate change has gendered effects. We know that women, for example, are more affected by disasters. If you recall the tsunami that struck in the year 2004 and that killed several 100,000 people, 70% of these killed in the disaster of the tsunami are women. And that has to do, there is a direct correlation between the lower place in society that women tend to have in practically all of our societies and these effects. Now, we need to strengthen the resilience of women for the energy transition. We need to think of women when we are going at reskilling. For example, the just transition mechanism of the European Union, which is a great document, when he speaks about reskilling the workers from a coal mining region, well, these tend to be men, so very good to reskill them, but what about thinking about skilling and reskilling women so that they can also take part in the growth of the sector that we are expecting? So that's just a few sketches.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it is in line with one of the options and answers of the group, of the answer rather, that we've posed to the Slido group. Which groups do you consider most vulnerable in the green transition? You said women, certainly, and it is one of the elements there without any doubt. Michael, Solidar, tell us about how your company is contributing to an inclusive transition for all. What does it do, and how does it contribute to the goal that is at discussion here?
Well, thank you very much. Solar is not a company, though. It's an organization. It's a network of civil society organizations and social movements all across Europe. We have some 50-plus member organizations. And Irene spoke about participation. I think that couldn't be underlined enough. One of the main things that Solar does is bringing organizations together and act, and we try to act as instigators to broader coalitions also at the European level. So, for example, we were the initiators of something called the European Alliance for Just Transition, which gathers social actors, environmental organizations, political parties all together under a declaration to advance the transition in a faster pace, in a more transformative way. And these alliances are also key, no matter at which level we are, to make sure that we, from our side, as civil society, organized citizens, the vulnerable groups we're talking about now, and the organizations that represent them, take part in institutionalized form and are prepared to do our role here. And it's not just important from a democratic point of view. It's also important because of the quality of the policies that we propose. I mean, for them to be measured, targeted, accurate in terms of local needs and the needs of vulnerable groups, they need to be consulted. And not just, as a thing you do when you send out an email or you do a Slido, but in an institutional way, in an empowered way, which actually has a material impact on the policy that is proposed. And it also, when it's done properly, increases the acceptance for the policy changes. Because if we say really powerful words, like we want transformative changes of our economies, if we mean that, really mean that, it is an upheaval of the way we're living now. And people need to be on board. Like all of us need to really endorse this, take part, engage in whatever way we can, wherever we are, whether it be in social economy we saw just now, or in our different sectors. So the acceptance here and the buy-in from everyone is really key. And maybe just one final thing. I've been thinking a lot about the question that you just posed, because I think it tends to lead us the wrong way. And it has a risk to it, because it sort of carries the connotation that this is something for someone else, like the poor. The transition that is coming, whether it's because of the climate effect, whether it's organized the way we want it to be, planned, we do it in a proper way, or it's chaotic and destructive. It's not going to be for any particular population. We're all going to suffer. This is about our life conditions. So the most vulnerable, they will always be most vulnerable. Then the same always for every transition everywhere. But this is not for someone else. This is for all of us. This transition is coming, and we all need to get part. Participation, therefore, social and civil dialogue is key.
The transition is coming. We all better get prepared for it, regardless of which bracket you find yourself in, or do consider yourself part of one of these groups or not. Miriam, Equinox, of course, Initiative for Racial Justice. Inclusiveness is your bread and butter, your DNA, if you will, of that initiative. Tell us more about it and how it contributes to the overall goal that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's inclusiveness, and I think it's also important to decide what we mean by inclusiveness. So we are a racial justice initiative that is led by people of color and racialized people in Europe, and that's quite rare, and that's really important that, communities speak for themselves and have a voice, and that, no one speaks on their behalf. I'm very happy to see words migrant, Roma communities, people in the global south. I think I'll get to it, refugees. I mean, obviously, racialized people in Europe tend to be among also people, poor people, immigrant people who tend to live near, toxic waste and power plants and, things we don't really want in society, that kind of not in my backyard dynamic that end up in segregated housing and in kind of poor resource neighborhoods. So that's in Europe, that's the context, and that's the communities that are more vulnerable. I think it's also important to look at the global perspective. This is a global crisis and multiplicity of crises, and people in the global south did not cause those crises, but they are on the front line of suffering from these effects. 600 million people are in situation of energy poverty in Africa alone. And we talk a lot right now about energy prices, energy poverty. This is not just a European problem. This has been a global problem for a while, and it's time, and that the EU wakes up. The main challenge, I think, I would echo what's been said before: participation, inclusiveness. The EU's approach to decision making is very much industry-based, just the von der Leyen Commission, and it's just the top commissioners and their cabinets. We don't have data for officials, but they've met with the fossil fuel industry so many times since the beginning of the mandate is the equivalent of one meeting per working day. These are the people that the Commission is currently listening to. They're not listening to the people in the front lines. They're not listening to communities suffering, to communities creating, renewable energy projects, together and have the real solutions. They're listening to the very industry that's caused the crisis we're in, and I think this is really something that's key. COP27 is currently undergoing. There are over 600 lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry there. We see the decisions and discussions that are coming out of Sharm el-Sheikh right now. It's not looking good because of the people that are being listened to. There's a big call, the COP is happening in Africa. There's a big call to do not gas Africa. That's not what's going on right now. The EU is kind of looking for short-term fixes to the gas scarcity because of Russia's war in Ukraine, and it's going to gas Africa. So I think this is really something that we need to look at in a very open and frank eye, because we don't have the luxury to kind of sit around and be polite.
And you shouldn't. This ought to be a frank discussion, and we appreciate your words. Obviously, this is a conference organized by the Commission, and they will listen very carefully to what you have to say and take that into account. Thank you for the time being, Miriam. I will revert, of course, back to you, but let me bring in Juliana here. The one term, and I know Mikael wasn't to add, is poor. We shouldn't, he says, perhaps rightfully correct, shouldn't narrow it down and limit it to some of the options that I'm seeing here already on stage. You, of course, are the director at the European Anti-Poverty Network. The green transition is going to leave some people behind. How do we avoid this? How do we bring everyone on board?
Yes, as the APN, we represent, first of all, we'd like to introduce our work. We represent 32 national networks and 13 European organizations trying to, I think my earring is making this noise. Yeah, sorry. So trying to find solutions to poverty and social exclusion. For us, poverty is a multi-dimension issue. We cannot isolate it from other dimensions in society. I think here from the scoreboard, you see poor in the center, but we have to understand the different categories and the different layers that encompass when someone is experiencing poverty, because there are different manifestations. There are people who are low-skilled workers, like is written there, that are the low-income group, but there are also those people working in poverty, and there are also those who are living already in vulnerable areas, in segregated areas, in which we could already, like mentioned before, understand before all this crisis, the structural barriers that were there to really meaningfully eradicate poverty. For us, in terms of challenge, the question of food insecurity and food availability is something to the core. Food, especially in the context of climate, is seen as a commodity, it's not as a fundamental right. And I think we need to shift this idea and really work as something, a fundamental right, as a human right, because access to food should be at the center of our lives. I think as well the question of the disproportionate expenses of energy on households, low-income households, because then you have to target your budget to pay the bills of school, health, education, and on the top of that, you have extremely expensive energy costs. The question of the digital divide as well. Digitalization became a way, a platform to people to be able to access goods and service, and with the different multiple crises, digitalization is not a top priority anymore for people living in poverty, and how they're going to access all the subsidies, all the support, all the financial resources that are over there if they don't have access to the digital.
We'll certainly hear more from you and get more input as the discussion evolves. But let me bring in Carlos here last, but certainly not least, the Senior Research Fellow at Nordregio. Tell us, how does Nordregio factor into the discussion that we're having here about not leaving people behind in this green transition that is inevitably here? It's not coming, it is here.
Yeah, well, we essentially do research. We are a research organization, so that's our role, and that's what we are trying to contribute to this debate. So when it comes to research, we know that we still know too little about the green transitions and the impact of the green transitions on vulnerable groups. Certainly, we know that the green transitions are not causing vulnerabilities by themselves. So we are not dealing with something that is creating, vulnerabilities, but it's somehow overlapping or contributing in some ways to that issue. There's essentially two big mechanisms in that. One is household finances, everything that relates to income streams that might be discontinued, job losses, etc., and also expenditure, people that are increasingly, cost of living in general. And the other big mechanism is behavioral change that is induced through regulations, etc. So from that, exploring those mechanisms, we can come up with a few ideas on how these impacts are materializing. The first one is that these impacts are actually overlapping with other pre-existing situations, as we said before. So for example, you think about energy poverty and transport poverty, how that overlaps with other conditions like single parental households, older adult households, or people living with some kind of disability, and how these issues are affecting them more than others. And this brings me to the second point, which is that impacts are also asymmetric. They don't distribute evenly, but they tend to affect more different groups. And we can also see that from the labor perspective. Some regions are more affected because of the specialization of the regional economies, are more exposed to sectors that need to be decarbonized. And also, these impacts can be transferred. Within households, for example, most children affected by the green transitions in our context are not affected directly, but through their parents and the living conditions and working conditions of the adults living in the same household. And also, children living in the global south can also be affected through international value chain, child labor, and other phenomena. So all these are certainly important things, but it's also relevant to bear in mind that the impacts can also be mixed. We are talking about the negative externalities of the transitions because, of course, we want to avoid them. But there's also a lot of opportunities. It's societal change that we need to accept, probably embrace, but it's also giving very important opportunities for people, for example, that are excluded from labor markets, that could see in these environmental goods and services sectors new opportunities for, getting integrated again. And we saw this morning very good examples on the circular economy and other sectors.
And research obviously very essential in determining what needs to be done here, the data that is sort of our fuel that makes and drives our decision making. Let's have a quick look. We asked before we kick-started this debate here, which groups do you consider most vulnerable in the green transition? Clearly, this is a very simplified question for the purpose of just getting a glimpse shot here. But let's still have a look at the result nonetheless. Do we have an order? So we're already seeing a lot of the terms that we've mentioned, that we've heard. Many of those pertain to your field of expertise. Migrants, Roma, women, poor, low-skilled. Again, this is obviously just a snapshot. This is not a comprehensive and all-inclusive answer, but just to give you an idea of what the people out there who are listening to this discussion are thinking about the various approaches. with that, let me pose the second and last question to those joining us, namely, and you've already alluded to it a little bit, Miriam, everybody has to do more. The question is, who should particularly do more efforts to reduce energy consumption and tackle climate change? Yes, can we go back to the first slide, to the question? Who should particularly do more efforts? There you go. Who should particularly do more efforts to reduce energy consumption and tackle climate change? The richest people, the middle class and the richest people, corporate sector, policymakers, everyone should do more. The options, again, we will look at the results. Irene, while I have you, this is going to take a massive effort on everyone involved. Who, according to you, who should step up here? Who should step up here at the end of the day so that we're not talking just about a vision, but moving on to a reality?
Frankly, I don't like the question the way it is phrased, because I think very much, as was said before, this is not, what we are talking about is not just about reducing energy consumption. And no individual group will be able to tackle climate change.
How would you have rephrased it?
Of itself. What is needed, who should do more to make the energy transition more inclusive, participatory, and diverse? I think we need to look at it in a positive way, because there are many opportunities, and the energy transition offers us the possibility to create societies that are different from our current societies and more just and more inclusive. You know, in that sense, obviously, the richest people should contribute more to the energy transition. But when I come back to my key constituency, which are women in energy, women that are already working in energy, and women that should be working in energy but cannot because of the various gender stereotypes and biases that present obstacles, then I think we need a number of actors who need to do things. We need good regulatory frameworks. We need to include the gender dimension in the implementation of the great European documents that we have before us, the European Green Deal and all the subsequent documents. They are not gendered at this point, and that needs to happen. But we also need authorities at the national level to create legislation that makes it possible to create a better working environment for women and men through parental leave, through better division of labor between women and men in terms of the paid and the unpaid work. And we need to continue to work with industries and with companies to raise awareness about the benefits of employing women. And these benefits have been documented by many studies, you know, from the World Bank to the World Economic Forum in Davos to McKinsey. They all show how having a more diverse workforce is good for the bottom line, but also brings societal benefits and benefits for national economies. And we also have, and that's my last point perhaps, since we celebrated the Skilling Pact yesterday, the 2 years of it, we need to work on skilling women also with a view of making them fit for the jobs that are going to come up in the energy transition. And that needs to start very early, probably at kindergarten, you know, so that we can create a pipeline of more well-qualified women. There are already many well-qualified women, but we need more of them, since the jobs are going to increase, the number of jobs is going to increase quite significantly in the green transition, and we have the opportunity to create a better and a more level playing field for women and men alike.
Well, as we are furthering this discussion along, perhaps I'm sure people online via Slido are already chiming in here. If maybe if at any point you can throw us the questions if there are any, and I'm happy to incorporate them obviously into the discussion. And Michael, you want to pick up on what Irene said about education, perhaps skills, starting at the very early age to bring everyone on board.
Well, yes, I agree with that. So yes, education is important to make sure that we have an educated citizenry. But I would like to talk about this even more.
Yes.
Because I think maybe contrary, I think everybody's affected by this. So the notion that someone is more vulnerable, it's true, of course. We have our societies are defined by power hierarchies, and some are at the losing end and some are at the winning end. But we're all going to be affected. However, the responsibility for this then mirrors this hierarchy. So the richest and the corporate sector are, of course, the ones who need to do more. Inequality is driving this, the catastrophe that we're currently living in. I mean, there's no way around it. And we need to talk about very, very frankly now. It's not just about the extreme wealth that is not currently being accumulated. We have never been living as humans in a society more unequal than today. The wealth of the 400 richest humans on this earth is incomprehensible almost. You know these when you can actually create a physical experience of how much a billion is, because you say a billion, it sounds like one, but it's a billion afterwards. But then you try to scroll it on a screen with your finger and it takes forever, you know? These amounts are something we need to talk about, because they also are the main emitters. We need to talk about the fossil fuel industry, who are not playing ball. They are continuously investing in new oil fields, in new coal mines. They're working contrary to the transition that we need to be on. So inequality is key here. And to create a new taxation system that has this as the sort of fundament of analysis. So we need to redesign and we need to redistribute. If we don't redesign and redistribute, we won't get very far. It doesn't matter if I, as a private middle-class person, buy a bulb that I put up in my kitchen and feel, oh, this is much better than the previous one I had. It's good because it's a matter of consciousness and the way we then place demands on policymakers and others. This is all intertwined, But it's insignificant if the Bezos and the others of this world doesn't play ball. And, for that, we need policies, we need legislation. And otherwise, it won't happen.
And the questions that we're addressing here obviously is something that our Slido participants are also echoing. How can we ensure that the green transition happens in a fair manner, meaning that it is inclusive and leaves no one behind? We answer the how can we protect the most vulnerable? Are we able to make a successful and fair transition without questioning current indicators of economic growth? I think Miriam Michael touched upon an important point about redistributing, about overcoming this unprecedented historic level of equality that we're witnessing. But of course, the billion-dollar question is how?
I mean, I think, and to go also a bit, just very shortly, I mean, if you look at history and how, we've acquired the social rights we have now, although there's very strong efforts to dismantle them, no one has never acquired anything by asking nicely. That's just my personal conclusion. Billionaires are not going to nicely give away all their money. Corporations are not going to nicely decide, oh, we're sorry, we're very wrong, we're giving up. A company's interest is to make profit and keep their shareholders happy. That's what they're going to keep doing at any cost, and we see that in the lobbying and the things that they defend. So for me, it's really up to decision makers, the people we've elected, to represent us and represent our best interests, to do what their job is, which is to regulate those industries, to take away billionaires' money, to go back to a tax regime, to, have a backbone and do it. It's really, it's quite shocking to see that teenagers have more courage than ministers. And we're seeing this at COP every day. In terms of the just transition and what should happen, for me, it is also really a deeper questioning of what Europe is doing. When you look at the way the approach of the EU to the just transition completely reproduces extractive colonial dynamics that have put us in this situation in the first place. So it is really a much deeper questioning than individual policies or sectoral initiatives or investments or discussion in that sense. I think what we're seeing come out right now is a lot of techno fixes which come from industry, right? Carbon offsets, net zero, quote unquote, which is not real zero, obviously. We're basically putting kind of a green fox in the chicken coop and thinking that it's all going to be okay, and it's not. So we really need to interrogate a just transition for whom. And if we look at the global level, it's also a matter for me of, again, putting communities at the center of decision making. So we're seeing discussion now about giant wind farms in Kenya, huge solar panel fields in Morocco that are not serving the communities that they're implanted in, and that are either being fought by the communities, or they're so desperate by years of underdevelopment by Europe that they're desperate for the crumbs that they might get. So it's really about, from a global perspective, who benefits from the transition and how. And I think there's also a bit of a delusion in Europe that, like you said, Michael, that we're going to keep living the way we live. I mean, an electric car needs about 4 times as much copper as a regular car. So this idea that everybody's going to be able to switch their regular car for an electric car and we're all going to be okay, where does the copper come from? It comes from somewhere. There are people living in those communities. We're going to have to go and mine this copper, and we're going to end up again in the same colonial extractive dynamics of the global north just goes and mines and take the resources that they need to have a just transition for themselves, but who's left behind from a global perspective is the same communities who've done nothing to cause this and are trying to fight it, but don't really, their voice are not being listened to. So I think that's the main conclusion maybe for.
No, very important messages, and in fact, they are very compatible to the messages and statements that we've heard yesterday from many of our panelists, namely that this system, sort of the way we live, we reached certain limits, and we need completely new way of rethinking things. Juliana, the one question, however, and here again, is then, of course, the big question of how. I think we all understand and we all agree, at least on this panel and yesterday, that the current system is unfair, it is unequal, it is only serving a very few, and it is destroying the planet. Now, of course, we're saying appealing to our policymakers, being tough, regulatory frameworks. What is your approach? What specific policies and measures, investment and support measures should be placed to support this?
I think Miriam touched upon a very important point about misinformation and how we are creating myths around what should be green or not. And I think there is a lot of awareness raising over there that needs to be done to debunk the myth. People should not be alienated, they should be able to make their own choices. So I think this is really an important issue. From a very concrete point of view, I will be a little bit repetitive with other colleagues before. I think we really needed to reform this liberal energy market. But I think that I think the way we are doing now is that we are working a lot on urgent and individual measures when we should be working more on the structural and preventive measures. So the economy between incentives and subsides, I think we should shift the wheel and probably invest more in prevention rather than be here just trying to find solutions when things are already in a very complicated situation. Also, from our point of view, again, yes, tax for those who have a higher income. Of course, a progressive green tax reform is very important, but also from the point of view of taxing those with a high income, but also reviewing the tax system for labor and employees. EU has one of the highest rate of tax on employees. And we think when we have to do this reform, we have to think about also those paying the other side of the taxes. And green, why green? Because we need to introduce and really put forward the polluters pay principle as core of this discussion. Those who pollute the most should pay the most. And of course, we're not talking here about low-income households who do not have the resource to shift very quickly towards a 100% green environment. We are talking about the big companies, the big system that really pollutes the environment and has been polluted over the years.
Certainly very passionate discussion that I'm hearing, very passionate speakers here. Unfortunately, we're slowly running out of time. We are coming to a conclusion of this session, but still, Carlos, I want to bring you in and ask you about data, right? At the end of the day, we know what needs to be done. There's no lack of data, is there? There's no lack of information. I think it's just a matter of who gets that information? How do we get it to the right people to make the necessary and educated decisions?
Well, there's some lack of data anyways. I will get to that, but before getting there, I would just like to say that I guess that the bottom line in this discussion is that we need to use this transition process to enable a more fair and just society in general. So it's an opportunity in a way to have this process of socio-technical change. If I can use this expression, it comes from research field. But the thing is that in order to get there, we need to see these processes as not just as an overlap of mitigation policies, but as something that has more transformative character. And in order to do that, we need to be sure that we tick a few boxes that are important to enable that kind of policy approach. The first one is that we need to ensure embeddedness and coordination. Embeddedness means that we need to make sure that the social dimension is embedded in climate policy. Climate policy should consider social aspects as well. We were claiming, I've been working on climate issues for a few years already, and I remember the times we were just claiming that climate policy should be mainstreamed to sectoral policies and industrial policies. Now is the time for climate policies to embed social aspects. And coordination is also very important, because by coordinating policies, we can boost synergies or make the most out of synergies. So for example, there's a lot of low-hanging fruits that we can use to tick several boxes at the same time. For example, if you think about anything related to refurbishing social houses, or energy communities, or circular economy projects that were presented before. So all these things we need to use more. The other element is that we also should try to increase awareness, and this is where data steps in, and specificity of different situations. We've been talking about women, poor people, and all sorts of vulnerable groups that require ad hoc analysis and ad hoc data. So for example, if you think about energy security, it has a totally different meaning if you think about that from the perspective of a young adult living in an urban condominium compared to, if you think about that from the perspective of an old person living in a detached house in a rural area. It's a totally different perspective on the same issue. And we need specific tools, specific data, and also specific methods. Whenever we are uncertain about the impacts of whatever policy, we need to apply social impact assessment methods to analyze them. And very final points, participation has already been mentioned. It's also very important to encourage impactful participation of all social groups in these processes, because these will improve the quality of the policies. But also, communication is key. We need to ensure that the green transitions are portrayed in the right way, because these job-killing arguments in terms of political polarization and populism are very dangerous and can really create a real burden or hurdle on the transitions.
Well, regrettably, we are almost out of time. Let's have a quick look at the outcome of the question that we have posed. We should particularly do more efforts to reduce energy consumption and tackle climate change. Understand that the question can be rephrased in many different ways, but perhaps if we have the results, let's have a quick look nonetheless of what our viewers out there, Slido participants, have voted for. There we have it. The corporate sector, 60%, richest people, 52%. They're probably intertwined, I think. At the end of the day, everyone should do more, 50%. Policymakers, I'm not getting a number there, but I probably assume, judging by your passionate statement, that some people have pleaded for that as well. I think it goes without saying that such an important, timely, and vast subject matter cannot be fully and sufficiently discussed in 45 minutes. It's bound to leave out many important aspects. But I think even within this considerably and relatively short amount of time, our 5 panelists have splendidly given us a lot of food for thought and given us a sense of direction of where we're headed. The European Commission, for sure, is watching this and will take a lot of what is being said here certainly into account. Irene Gina-Reichel, Michael Ley, Miriam Duo, Juliane Wallgren, and Carlos Tapia. Thank you so much. This is your applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the next session actually will take place here in less than 15 minutes at 11:30. This is the play. We're going to go until 1 p.m., one session after another. It feels a bit like speed dating sometimes, but it's going to be fun nonetheless. 11:30, next session back here, or if you choose, in the other 2 breakout sessions. Thank you so much. Yes, yes, please join me indeed. Just take your seats left and right from me. Great to have you all with us. Yeah, come here. We'll move it along as we go. This is a session titled Exploiting Synergies Between the Green and the Digital Transitions. The European economy is undergoing unprecedented and accelerated transformations towards a green and digital future, something I'm sure that has been made abundantly clear throughout today's discussion. And in this panel, we will discuss how to tackle these challenges and seize the opportunities of the twin transitions. Delighted to have a great panel here with us. She's a senior assistant professor at the Politecnico di Milano School of Management, Alessandra Neri. Great to have you with us. To my immediate right, we have the research manager at Visionary Analytics, Odrone Saudaskaite. Great to have you with us. To my left, he's an EU government affairs manager at Schneider Electric, Loic Delorme. And joining us both live online, he's a professor of social ecological transformation at TU Berlin and the Einstein Center Digital Futures, Tilman Santarius. And last but certainly not least, delighted to be joined by Carl Frey, who's an Oxford Martin City Fellow at the University of Oxford. Great to have you all with us. 45 minutes. We have to take a deeper dive into the subject matter. Tilman, if I can start with you and ask you to perhaps briefly set the scene. We've heard numerous times that the digital and green transitions are the 2 paramount objectives of the European Commission. Give us a sense, what is the status of knowledge right now on the twinning?
Yes, thank you so much, and hello everybody. I hope you can hear me well. I'm glad to be part of this discussion, and yes, in terms of setting the scene, I'm particularly happy because I think it's so important for the future of this continent, of all of the EU, that we have 2 narratives. For one, the Green Deal, and secondly, the Fit for the Digital Age. The 2 narratives, sustainability and digitalization, as the overarching purposes and development directives of the Union. However, when we look at the actual legislation that is coming from either package, all the new legislation under the Green Deal or the Fit for the Digital Age package, most of the legislations and policy initiatives here are taking place still in isolation. And it's not systematically thought through how to make the green more digital or more aware of the opportunities and risks of digital technologies for green, and vice versa, how to make digital policy making more as an instrument, as a facilitator to achieve the green goals, okay? And I think that research regarding the interface of sustainability and digitalization is well available. We have lots of research on the potentials of information and communication technologies, media infrastructures, apps, and so forth to contribute to green development and sustainability goals. Lots of potentials here. We have lots of research on the challenges of ICT, in particular the increasing footprints stemming from hardware and software operation. And we have somewhat research on the potential, not only potentials, but also on the new risk regarding new production and consumption modes that go along with digitalization, the risks for sustainability. I'd just like to bring a few examples on the potentials of ICT for green. We have already some studies, mostly coming from consultancies. There's one particular study from the Global E-Sustainability Initiative, suggesting that probably 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions can be reduced by ways of systematic digitalization. However, most of these studies look at the potentials only and do not take the risks or paramount countervailing effects into account. On the second dimension, the increasing footprint of ICT, the environmental footprints, we have a couple of reliable numbers here. I'd just like to mention global numbers from research. Roughly 8% of the electricity consumption in the Union stem from the internet and all interconnected devices. 2 to 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions on this planet are going to the account of information and communications technology. So on the footprints, I think research is well done. On the third dimensions, the not only potential, but the new risks that go along. Here we definitely need more research. I can just bring an example. Online shopping, for instance, has the potential to reduce transport emissions, but also goes along with an increasing amount of products shopped and bought. There's a few studies that clearly show that the more mobile the act of shopping becomes, the higher the shopping level becomes. Then we have additional problems like shredding of return packages or unwanted data use for marketing and for commercials in the realm of e-commerce. There's, for example, a nice study for the EU Parliament from CE Delft that shows that unwanted data traffic for advertisements on smartphones alone account for roughly the same amount of energy consumed by 1 million European households. So this is significant. And this is just an example. So the new risks and the new challenges that go along with increased digitalization for sustainability, these issues need to be taken into account. Let me close here my initial remark by saying I think we have a threefold agenda to better align the digital and the sustainability. First, we need to increase our initiatives to reduce the footprint of ICT hardware operation and the internet. Second, we need to more systematically integrate sustainability goals into digital policymaking. Take, for example, the AI Act or data governance. These legislations can include sustainability criteria and goals, or take, for example, the Digital Markets Act or the Digital Services Act. These now, as of now, particularly play out for democracy and privacy. Next step could be to integrate sustainability standards for large platforms. And the third, so first, reduce footprint. Second, integrate sustainability goals in digital policy making. And thirdly, integrate much more systematically the opportunities and risks of digital solutions into sustainability policy making. Now, in agriculture or transport or energy laws or climate legislations, we could much more digitalize these policy areas to take account of the potentials, but also the risks
Right.
that digitalization brings along. Thank you.
Thank you, Tilman, for setting the scene here when we're talking about exploiting synergies between the green and digital transitions. Alessandra, chime in here. From your perspective, from your experience, how can digitalization help energy intensify industries with sustainability and tackling the social challenges that Tilman spoke about?
Yeah, so first of all, let's focus on sustainability as the intersection of the social, environmental, and economic pillars. So actually, there are a lot of opportunities that are offered by digital technologies to energy-intensive firms in order to improve their sustainability performance. So, for example, let's focus on energy efficiency, which is a great part of sustainability, and it's also part of the core business of energy-intensive industry. So basically, we might think, okay, it's easy for them to implement energy efficiency interventions, but actually these interventions are hindered by a series of barriers that can be tackled by digital technologies. So one of the main barriers is, for example, the lack of information on how our processes are actually working. So thanks to digital technologies such as the IoT and or the big data analytics, we are able to collect, monitor, and analyze data in order to better get to know our processes. There are also barriers that are related, for example, to technical or managerial aspects. And from the research we conducted, it emerged that actually digital technology can make the decision-making process more reliable and more straightforward. So let me give you an example. If we buy an equipment from a manufacturer, we can integrate our equipment with the system of the manufacturer through an integration of horizontal systems, so that the manufacturer is able to check the stops of the equipment or for how many hours the equipment has worked, and it's able to tell us, okay, you need to do preventive maintenance at this stage. So the process and the communication is very straightforward. Another important barrier is related to inertia and behavioral barriers in general. So from our perspective, these kind of barriers are still related to lack of information. So again, digital technologies can offer great support. From what perspective? If we are able to integrate all the parts of the firms, so the different departments of the different processes through the integration of vertical system, we saw yesterday, for example, the example of Yamamai, that they were using a product lifecycle management system. So we create a sort of shared knowledge within the firm, and we are also able to provide some insights that go beyond the energy efficiency intervention. So, okay, my intervention is tackling energy efficiency, but what are the repercussions on social aspect or on other environmental aspects? And so they can provide us with some information on what we call the non-energy benefits, basically. But digital technologies can also offer some opportunity, for example, for occupational health and safety. So wearable sensors or cameras can protect the operator by dangers. And also, digital technologies are very useful for tracking the near misses. That so far the track of the near misses is totally dependent on the operator and on the fact the operator realized that there was a near miss happening. Overall, of course, there are some negative side of digitalization that we should take into account, and there are also barriers to the adoption of digital technologies within the firm. Something I would just like to underline is that when we put together the human beings, so the operator and the digital technology, what we should do is to create a human-centric technology, so that the technology is not interfering with the operation and with the operator, but is actually supporting the daily activity of people.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. I will come back to you, of course, as we progress the discussion, but let me turn to Loike just for a second. Give us a sense at Schneider Electric. How are you mastering the combination, if you will, of green and digital transitions?
Yeah, thank you. I think Chiara has actually given a lot of the very strong points when it comes to our manufacturing side, when it comes to our production side, and when it comes to the employment side, in that we are strong believers of the twin transition, what we would call sort of electricity 4.0, the idea that the energy of tomorrow will be decarbonized, it'll be decentralized, digitalized, data-driven, and that when you put that on the factory floor, it means means you're decarbonizing. Our factories run on solar energy. We've got a factory of the future, we like to call it, in Vaudreuil, Normandy, that runs entirely on renewables. And of course, once we've gone and decarbonized, that means we've electrified everything. Once we've electrified everything, well, we can digitalize everything. From there, you can automate as much as you can, so that every single part of the factory floor is supporting the workers there, the operators, and that means that we've got fairly high level, like high skill work and high value work that is sort of enabled by that transition. Exactly as you were saying, the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles moving across the factory floor, using cameras to avoid accidents, the analysis of near misses, but mostly data at every single stage of the assembly line, of the production line, because that's where the real value is, and it's where the high skill work is. And that is something here at the Employment and Social Rights Forum that seems pretty important to sort of include in the fair transition. And then on the sort of the social rights side, I spotted a question going around in the Slido that was saying that is the transition only for the wealthy? Is it something unaffordable for most? And I really want to push back on that idea that energy efficiency is some sort of a luxury, or that the transition is something for those who can afford it. It should be for those who can't afford it, because so let's just take buildings as an example, right? Right now they are emitting 30% of Europe's carbon emissions, and 10% of the people who live in those buildings are spending over 30% of their income on their energy bill. And for that, on top of that, 30% of people are living in subpar conditions, living conditions, be it from the ventilation, be it from the heat, be it from the noise levels. And so our buildings are not only killing the planet, they're killing us. And they're mostly killing the vulnerable. And a lot of the time, it's very hard, you very rarely get a death certificate that says this person died of energy poverty, right? Because most of the time what happens is everyone lowers, especially like people in energy poverty and precarious situations, all of them lower the temperature in their homes ever so slightly, and each of them has a slightly increased risk of catching a cold, and for people who are old, in addition to being poor, that's an increased chance of dying. That's something we can see in the differential death rates, but the best example I found of that was, frankly, last week, the UK coroner came out and said, this 2-year-old child died from poverty. They died because they had mold in their apartment, because their apartment was not correctly ventilated. And it caused a respiratory illness from which they suffered from birth and from which they eventually died. And so our social foundation, so the Schneider Electric Foundation and our social foundation, the latter of which is funded by our employees, we work to try and renovate homes of people who are living in energy poverty. So that means redoing insulation, that means redoing the ventilation, where we can, but we can't always, installing a heat pump. It means putting in place where we can, where there's the digital skills for it, the home management systems, because that's got a very, it's not as big of a difference, but the return on investment is really, really good. It's really cheap compared to a lot of technologies, and it's something that is available to many more, and that should be available to many more.
Thank you so much for giving us an overview of the inner dealings and the prioritization within your companies. You mentioned workers, of course, and employees. Audron, this is what brings me to you, and to get your assessment of how the workers are engaged in technological adoption process, and how are they reacting? How are they perceiving these changes that are coming their way?
Right, indeed. Thank you, Ali. It's a pleasure to be here. I think that it's very important to talk about worker involvement, as I see it as one of the enabling conditions for achieving a just transition, green or energy or digital transition alike. So I don't particularly make a distinction between the green or the digital transition when speaking about this. And we have indeed recently carried out a study for the European Parliament on these particular issues. So let me actually first focus on the rationale of worker involvement. So why is it important to talk about this? So worker involvement actually has a crucial role in the twin transition, because research shows that worker involvement in decision-making centered around technology adoption actually leads to better outcomes. since there's no single predetermined transformation path, meaning that introduction of a technology can actually create both gains and losses. And this is something that Commissioner Schmidt actually highlighted yesterday in his speech that past transitions have showed us. And in the context of the twin transition, technologies can bring both gains and losses in terms of efficiency, job autonomy, job flexibility, job control, occupational health and safety, and so on. And it all depends on how the technology is actually adopted. So for example, introduction of remote work can both bring a lot of flexibility to workers, a lot of autonomy, but it can also increase surveillance or even exacerbate some of the occupational health and safety risks arising due to improper setup of home offices. Automation of manufacturing actually has the potential to relieve workers from some of the highly hazardous, strenuous physical work that they would otherwise have to do. But if workers are not properly trained on how to interact with the machines, then that can actually increase some of the risks. Let's say introduction of platform technologies to organize work can also make more jobs accessible to more people, but they can also trap people in precarious, low-skilled jobs in the platform economy. And so this just goes to show that the way in which technologies are introduced determine really the way the working conditions will change, whether for better or worse. And this really means that workers must have agency in the process, and that is exactly why we need well-functioning mechanisms that allow workers to participate in technology adoption to make sure that it assists rather than hinders their work, or even worse, leads to deterioration of working conditions. And it is also clear that inclusive workplaces are healthy workplaces, and higher work engagement is actually associated with better working conditions, more access to training, meaning good jobs. And the economic benefits coming from healthy workplaces can certainly be enticing enough to profit participants and be a convincing alternative to running a business that by design perpetuates precarious jobs.
Thank you, Odron. There's going to be a second round of questioning, of course, but let me bring in Carl here at the stage. Carl, good to see you. You are an internationally renowned expert on the future of work. Give us a sense, how is the twinning of the transition impacting that concept? Are you even seeing a shift from, such as in Industry 4.0 to 5.0 by now?
Well, let's go back and just remember what the European idea is about for a second. It's about convergence. It's about the notion that as trade barriers and barriers to investment come down, resources will flow to the poorest parts. We will see job creation there as a consequence, and places that were poor initially will catch up with the frontier. We will see convergence between Greece, Ireland, Germany, France, etc. And we also should see some convergence between places within countries, right? Between the Italian south, between the Italian north, between the rural area in Germany and the south, even between the south and the north in the UK to the extent it's still part of Europe. And we did see some of that happening during the post-war era. Unfortunately, we haven't seen it in recent decades. And some in the audience might still be old enough to remember the 1990s, when the web had just arrived, email had just arrived, and everybody was widely predicting the death of the office and the end of cities. That didn't quite turn out to be the case. For the next 2 decades, remote work was hovering around 4 or 5%. Across most of Europe. And in fact, what we did saw with the computer revolution was as jobs became more clustered than they used to be. They're clustered in places like Munich, Milan, London, Paris, Stockholm, Copenhagen. And when one new tech job is created in a city like Munich or Brussels, what happens then is that that person goes out in the local economy, spends his or her money on services, and that creates on average 5 new jobs in the local service economy. Conversely, though, what we have also seen is that computer technologies tend to be very effective at automating away routine rule-based activities in manufacturing. And when one manufacturing job disappears in a place like Gelsenkirchen, that means that roughly 1.6 jobs in the local service sector there disappears as well. So the computer revolution has unfortunately been a driver of divergence rather than convergence across Europe for the past couple of decades. And I think there's a real concern that we're seeing something similar with the green transition as well, because they have some things in common. Green jobs are unbalanced, more skilled than fossil fuel intensive jobs. Green jobs tend to emerge at different places geographically than old energy intensive jobs that disappear. So what the key concern is for the industry 0.4, or if you want to call it industry 5.0, is that while this is all good and noble objectives, it risks increasing the divergence. Fortunately, though, we have seen in recent years that as remote work with the pandemic has finally taken off, and through Zoom and other technologies have found better substitutes for face-to-face, we're seeing digital jobs beginning to spread out again. At least in part because house prices and real estate costs in prime locations like the Bay Area or London or Munich are so high. So even in technology sectors, there are opportunities to cut costs by moving jobs to places where it's cheaper. And I think the key task for policymakers in Europe to make sure that Industry 5.0 is also an inclusive transition is to think really hard about what are the kind of policies that we can implement to make sure that those jobs are not moving just anywhere, because if a job can be done remotely, it could also be offshore to India. How do we keep those jobs and shift them towards places which have suffered from the transition away from manufacturing and away from coal and other sectors? So we see a leveling geographically. And I think here we need to think about things like providing infrastructure to make it cheaper in producing in those locations. We have to think about policies that attract remote workers, such as good schools, good public services, and so on and so forth, to shift the momentum towards convergence and to end divergence. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Carl. Already the first round has shown the very many layers of this discussion that we're tackling here today. We have 15 minutes left in this discussion. Time is running fast, but I do want to get in a second round here. Alexandra, let me start with you here. You have studied barriers and drivers for the adoption of industrial sustainability measures. How can digitalization help overcome those?
Yeah, overall, from the research we have conducted, it emerged that the digital technologies can act in a twofold manner. So there is a direct impact of digital technology. Very simple, I adopt the IoT, I am able to retrieve more data and analyze my process, and I'm able to understand where I'm wasting material, where I'm emitting, and so this is a direct effect. And then we have indirect effect and direct impact, according to which, like, I adopt the technology allow me to enable some transformation within my firms in terms of skills, procedure, or processes. And then these changes that we call dynamic capabilities, just to recall Professor Mazzucato yesterday, somehow reshape the firm and make the firm more aware of the sustainable transition, and more, it makes it easier to them to move towards the sustainable transition. Indeed, it's interesting that a lot of firms are still adopting digital technology mainly for operation and process-related reasons, and then they realize only in a second stage that the digital technology also offers opportunities for the sustainable transition. And just to a little remark, I think, in my perspective, that, of course, digitalization is changing the job market, unfortunately, but also I think that this can be a great opportunity for firms to rethink their processes, so to stop doing what they have been done so far, reshape the production systems, and make it possible for the worker not to be an object of the digitalization itself, but to be an empowered actor of it. So this will be, for me, the shift from 4.0 to 5.0.
Yeah, thank you so much. Basically picking up from
Yeah.
where Carl left off there. Tilman, you wrote a very interesting book titled Smart Green World, which provides guiding principles for a sustainable digitalization and, more importantly, how to achieve these. Can you briefly share some of those principles with us?
Yes, of course. Thanks. I can do. And I think what we did in Smart Green World, that book was actually published in 2020. We've now even diversified and improved on those principles in a very recent report that we published only a few weeks ago, which is called Digital Reset. And this report I recommended to all of you. And let me try to do some screen sharing yet. I don't know if that works. And whether you can see my screen. So on the right-hand side, you see the cover of our Digital Reset report. By the way, this was a European endeavor bringing together 15 expert researchers and practitioners from different EU countries in drafting and conceptualizing this report. And on the left-hand side, you ask for the principles. Are 7 principles that we mention in this report. And I think they, overall, these principles try to bring together exactly the scene that we've said before. The environmental issues, together with equity and social issues, and the very specific work issues that Audrani and Carl also mentioned. And they should all be brought together in those principles. And maybe I can run through a few of those. I probably cannot dive into all 7. Regenerative design, something that Alessandra mentioned already. We need to go towards human-centered design. And I would even put it one more further, planet-encompassing design. And we need to bring the design process of technologies away from a company only towards a process that involves workers and policymakers and users and consumers. Think, for example, of smart city solutions, right? These solutions, just as one example, need to be designed by the very citizens in cooperation with the companies and the policymakers and the workers that are mainly impacted. The second principle, sovereignty, is pretty straightforward. Data privacy, data sovereignty need to be at the heart of a sustainable digitalization. Resilience is very important. We see current tendencies in the digital economy towards more centralization and more monopolization and increased dependencies on very few digital infrastructures, like the big platforms. Take, for example, shopping or industry or even education, right? And here we need to achieve more decentralization and independence from the very few monopolized industries, which also then in a second instance brings more resilience to the overall European economy. Let me jump over equity and system innovations in terms of environmental sustainability. Most importantly are circularity and sufficiency. I think digitalization can contribute greatly to a circular economy. There's the big challenge, though, to make the ICT sector itself more circular, and this is a long way to go. And sufficiency, why sufficiency here? The final principle, I think digitalization by nature has the tendency to improve all kinds of efficiencies, you know, time efficiency or energy efficiency or cost efficiency, of course. But these have the downsides or the negative side effects to go along with rebound effects and further economic growth, which eats up parts of the efficiency savings potentials. And that is why sufficiency as an overarching strategy, digital sufficiency, is so important, increasing the lifetime of hardware, but also questioning how much and in which instances do we really need digital solutions to bring us closer to sustainability goals. This is very important to tackle the side effects of digital efficiency improvements. Thanks.
Thank you, Tilman, for laying out some of the guiding principles of your book. Again, it's titled Smart Green World. Skills, Carl, not surprisingly, is a term that was used frequently yesterday and today. How's the twinning of the transition impacting the demand for skills? does the transition require the same skill set, or is some adaptation required here?
Well, let me first agree with Tillman. I think that resilience is absolutely critical, and it's very much related to decentralization. So if you look at the financial crisis, for example, the companies that fared well during that period of time were decentralized firms where people had autonomy to act rapidly on the ground to changing conditions. When you have rapid changes in technology as well, which is what we're talking about today, with the twinning transitions, you need to give people the type of autonomy so that they can adapt the new technologies and change organizational structures as they go along in order to take full advantage of them. And there's a variety of studies that actually show that the reason why US firms were better able to take advantage of ICT technology early on during the computer revolution is because those firms were more decentralized. So I think the organizational changes that are required to achieve that, they also demand other type of skills, and those skills relate to adaptability, they relate to things that come associated with more autonomy. And what we see with regard to the changing skill content of jobs, with regard to the computer revolution as well, is precisely that they demand more cognitive skills. So computers have been very good at automating away routine, rule-based activities, which needs to be specified in computer code, where the computer programmer can essentially decide at every given contingency what the technology needs to do. On the other hand, what you do have is that it increases demand for cognitive and analytical skills. And computers have allowed people in service, professional service type of jobs, to essentially export their services to the rest of the world, using digital technology, have become productive, more productive in those type of tasks at the same time. And we're seeing a similar transition with regard to green technologies as well. We see that green jobs tend to be less intensive in routine rule-based activities that are also those that can be automated. And we see that they raise the demand for cognitive and analytical skills. Now, many of those skills, when it comes to green jobs in particular, are not necessarily skills that require a college degree. They require significant on-the-job training. So it's not just about higher education. We also need to adjust our vocational training systems to be able to take full advantage of the opportunities this transition offer. Thank you.
Thank you. Audron, do you want to add to or elaborate on what Carl was saying?
Actually, when listening to you, still thinking from the worker involvement side, I was reflecting a little bit about the fact that attitudes within the workforce are very diverse. You cannot really see the workforce as one unit, and there are optimists as well as skeptics and conservatives as regards to technology adoption. So we take this trend on the one hand, and on the other hand, we see how workers are actually involved in technology adoption on the ground, which is mostly in the actual adaptation processes, like adapting production lines, writing new standards of work, and so on and so forth. But what if we actually think about involving workers in the co-decision of whether to introduce a technology? Then we could actually kill two birds with one stone and already tackle the issue of some of the skepticism on whether technologies can actually bring benefits or not, and then actually make sure that technologies are introduced to address a specific need and not just needs defined by someone from the top or needs coming from market pressures.
Look, we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you, obviously being at this forum, how can the EU and national governments help companies such as you embrace this twin transition? Do you have any words of advice?
Yeah, I think that the EU actually does quite a lot of good things to enable the transition. And so my message is going to be mostly aimed at the national governments. And the two messages would be, one, stop making things worse, and two, get out the way. On the first one, so even before the current crisis, gas was not taxed to the level it should be. and electricity was overtaxed because there was this idea that gas was something essential and something was the more expensive of the two. Therefore, government aid should be going towards it. And if you're trying to have a transition where you're trying to decarbonize, the least you want is a level playing field. We're not even asking for help. We're asking for a level playing field. And then since the February, in the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which has dramatically worsened our energy supply, the response has been to either spend or set aside 630 billion euro, that is 4% of this year's GDP, exclusively on subsidies for energy. That is to say, paying people to burn energy. And it is not only not a good strategy, not a good help, because this is a supply problem, we need to be working on demand. It's a fundamentally unfair way of allocating aid. Because there's two types of households out there. There's middle and upper middle class households who see the higher energy bill and who will take a higher energy bill. And there's those who are living in poverty who will see a high energy bill coming and will simply not consume the energy that they normally would. And those people are foregoing the help. They are exactly the people who should be being helped, and they are exactly the people that are not seeing any of that help. And that is fundamentally unfair, and worse, it's making things worse. We are a company that prides ourselves on energy efficiency, on providing energy efficiency solutions, and we're being told that it's not worth it right now because the government is paying to prop us up. And it gets even worse. So on the second element of staying out the way would be that the EU has some really good proposals coming down the line on the emissions trading scheme, on CBAM, on the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is a really important part of helping companies make their transition, and on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which is a really important part of making sure that not just homes, but non-residential buildings, office blocks, buildings like this one, go through that transition, that they are decarbonized, that they digitalize. And right now, we're seeing a real lack of ambition on behalf of the member states. And the general approach that came out from the Council on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive was simply, we don't want to renovate existing buildings, not even residential, not even non-residential. We're not doing it. And that's really frustrating, and it's just not the time for this kind of petty politics. This is really a time when more needs to be done. Member states really need to get out the way of the EU.
Very outspoken and blunt way to end this very thoughtful and content-rich debate on the challenges and opportunities, of course, of exploiting synergies between the green and the digital transition. Just as the previous discussion, obviously 45 minutes cannot do justice to, fully justice at least, to this very vast and future-oriented discussion. But I think you all managed very, very well, splendidly, of giving us some food for thought and a direction of where we are headed. Loic Delorme, Alexandra Neri, Oddrun Sadauskaite, Tilman Santarius, Carl Frey joining us online. Thank you so much to everyone. This is your applause. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to have a 5-minute break. Gives you the opportunity to either stay in the room for the third and last breakout session, or up to your choosing. Obviously, other 2 breakout sessions are at your disposal as well. Thank you so much. Hello and welcome back to the third and last breakout session, this one titled A Fair Digital Transition, Digital Rights and Principles in the New World of Work. We've heard it before, the digital transformation brings many benefits, but also some risks. And we're here now to discuss how to conquer the digital divide and enhance social rights, empowering the vulnerable and ensuring that no one is left behind in the digital world. Once again, we have assembled a great panel with us. He's a senior economist at Employment, Labor and Social Affairs Directorate at the OECD. Stijn Breuke, welcome to you. Good to have you with us. She's the executive director of the UiPath Foundation. Raluca Negulescu-Balac will find out more about what the foundation does. We have with us Raul Perez Gonzalez, who's a project coordinator at the Fundación Secretariado Gitano. Hopefully I get that right by the end of the session. And joining us online, he's a member of the Parliament of Portugal and former Secretary of State for Employment, Miguel Cabrita, and the Canada Research Chair in Innovation Law and Society as Usgood Hall School, York University. I believe we have one person. Miguel is not quite joined yet, but we'll get him as the process goes along. Stijn, let me start with you. Sure. Let me start with you right away. Because we're talking about technological innovation and digitalization and how they have affected the European economy and its labor market. As somebody who is working on this day in, day out, how are the changes affecting the economy and the labor market in particular?
I think it changes the labor market in a lot of positive ways. I think technologies can make us more productive. We can do more with less. We've done recently a survey of workers in the manufacturing and finance sectors and also of employers. And the survey was specifically about artificial intelligence. And so 50% of workers will tell us that artificial intelligence has improved their performance a lot. And another 30% says it increased their performance by a little. So overall, 80% are really positive about the impact on performance, on productivity. And you can see this also in examples because we've been doing very specific case studies. And so, if, for example, in the insurance sector, we have examples where previously staff would have to look through insurance claims one after the other. There was a lot of claims to go through. And now, with artificial intelligence, a lot of the easy claims can be automated, so we can deal with a lot more of them, while staff are just left with the more complicated cases to deal with. The technology also makes us better at the jobs. It kind of increases the quality of the goods and services that we produce. In manufacturing, for example, previously we had people inspecting visually the kind of the products that we made. Now we have AI doing this much faster and much better, so the quality of the goods is improving. And we get this also, I have a little anecdote, a few years ago. It's not just the quality of the goods and services, it's also the quality of people's jobs. I was talking to a translator a few years ago and I asked her about artificial intelligence and whether she was worried about it. And she said, no, in fact, this is really good because AI deals with all the boring aspects of my job and now I can really focus on the nice and interesting parts of the translation work. Equally, it improves occupational safety and health. I mean, going back to the inspection example I gave in manufacturing, in one of the case studies that we did, we had a person tell us that he used to spend 8 hours a day in a dark room looking through a magnifying glass to look at the goods being produced, whereas now AI does the visual inspection and he has been moved on to other tasks in the job. So the physical safety and the health has improved a lot thanks to technology. So what we see in the service that we do is that AI tends to automate dangerous tasks, tedious tasks, and it tends then to create more of the more interesting and complex tasks. So overall, people are very positive about the impact that AI has on their physical and mental health and also on the enjoyment of their job. 50% says that AI has improved these things of workers, whereas only 10% say there's been a negative impact. One thing also that people perhaps don't talk about enough yet is the impact that AI and technologies have on the efficiency of the labor market. And I think in particular about how we achieve matches in the labor market, which is really important. We match people, skills, to vacancies and jobs. And this is a really difficult thing to do because we don't always have all the information, we have limited resources, we have limited time, and also we know that human beings are biased. And again, here we are seeing new technologies emerge that deal with the very boring tasks, the tedious tasks, but that take up a lot of time. And so people in recruitment, for example, these days can focus much more on the aspects of the job which are about building rapport, interviewing people, the really human side of the job. But it's not all positive, and I do want to highlight a few negative things. I think some of the other speakers will highlight some of these as well. In terms of job quality, one of the things that we're getting back from people is that the work intensifies. There's higher demands on people. And so just to give you an example from my own job, sometimes I like doing a bit of cut and paste in Excel because it kind of lowers the demands on my brain. Whereas AI and technologies tend to automate a lot of these tasks, so we're all left with the kind of really intensive tasks which make our brain smoke. And so this is something that we should watch. The other thing that people often talk about and worry about, of course, is the impact that AI or technologies have on jobs. Now, overall, at a national or a global level, we don't think that technology has negatively impacted the number of jobs. But what we do know is that there's a lot of churn underneath the surface, right? So in some occupations, in some sectors, in some regions, we do see job loss. And so this is the final point that I want to make, is that yes, there are benefits to technologies. There's also some risks. But what is also a real challenge, I think, for policymakers is that these benefits and these risks are not equally distributed. And that's, for me, I think, the greatest challenge going ahead.
Thank you so much, Stan, for giving an overview of the status quo when it comes to technological innovation and digitalization, how they have affected the European economy and its labor markets. Raluca, the European Commission clearly pursues digital transformation while leaving nobody behind. I think it has become abundantly clear throughout the speeches from all the responsible parties. Give us a sense, what is your foundation doing in this regard?
To make a segue from what you were saying, we're zooming into more concrete actions in the communities. And I think while you might not be familiar with what UiPath Foundation is doing, we're a nonprofit based in Bucharest, focusing on enabling underprivileged children to have access to quality education. And we focus a lot on developing the 21st century skills. That also entails digital literacy. And digital literacy, I think, is quite of a buzzword these days, right? Everybody talks about digital literacy, but how many of us are actually on the ground doing the work to nurture digital literacy as an essential skill for the workforce of the future? In marginalized communities, it's even more difficult because we can go and develop digital competences in poor communities, but we have to do that by curating in a very consistent and long-term way all the entire context that the kids are facing. So think that, and also I want to dismantle a bit the myths about digital literacy. Digital literacy is not just coding, and I think there's an inflation of coding and programming programs and activities for kids out there. If you look at the DigiComp framework, the European Commission framework for digital competencies, you see five components, 21 skills. And what we've discovered is that if you really want to develop digital literacy amongst children in poverty, you need a baseline. So I think as a researcher, you will agree most. We tend to develop programs that just check some of the skills, but not in a consistent and long-term manner that really prepares the workforce of the future. So what we've done at UiPath Foundation last year, after a deep research, discovered there's no standardized assessment tool for digital literacy based on the European Commission for kids from 7 to 18 years old. There are some self-assessment tests for the 15 years old, for the high school students, but you don't have a consistent tool, and we've built it from scratch, and it's free of charge, and it's available for 2.8 million kids across Romania. And of course, our mission is to bring it to the poorest communities. And soon it will be available in English. And this is a tool that can be used to diagnose the level of digital literacy amongst the kids in all the European Union countries. And it also enables to track progress. And it's an academically validated tool. And of course, we continue to develop digital literacy and to localize digital literacy resources in Romania, because in the past 4 years since we've doing this work, we could identify resources for 6 out of the 21 digital competences in the European Commission framework. So this is a challenge when it comes to the operational side, just to bring these resources on the ground and really develop in a very consistent manner the digital literacy among underprivileged children.
Thank you so much for giving us a sense of what your foundation, the UiPath Foundation, is doing. I'm going to come back to you in all of you just a moment. Let me bring in Valerio here just a moment. Thank you so much for joining us. We've already said that the digital transformation brings many benefits, but as Stein has pointed out, also obviously some risks as well. What about the impact on social rights here, Valerio?
Yes, thank you very much for having me. I think it is important to say that we should embrace technological and digital innovation only if it brings progress to us. So we should not conflate technological innovation with progress necessarily. The nuclear bombs were a technological innovation, but nobody would say that they are in any form a form of progress. The point here is to ensure that technology that we use is at our service and not the other way around, that we are at the service of the technology. Now, Stan spoke about a series of application of technology that help workers in the workforce, in the workplace, and make more boring jobs, or in some cases also more hazardous jobs or more heavy jobs go away, and there's nothing wrong with that. And even if it came with some risk of automation and some risk of job losses, it most likely will be for the best. It will then be a problem of redistribution and of reallocation of people, but this will not be something that should be contrasted per se. The problem is, however, that a lot of the innovation that we see at the moment in the labor market puts people at the service of the technology. And so the artificial intelligence is using, as Stan said, in hiring by maybe scanning and skimming curriculum data of people, or also by do a sort of facial scan, trying to recognize emotion during an interview to understand whether somebody is lying during an interview. There is monitoring involved. Artificial intelligence is used to constantly track people, especially those that wear wearable devices that contain a GPS, and so they follow them everywhere along in a warehouse, and we know how that works. That basically the wearable device starts blaring or gives information to the manager if these people stop talking with a colleague or if they go to the restroom, and the pace of work is intensified by the fact that this technological device impose a work pace that in many cases is completely unsustainable, and track how many movements these people do. But also in white-collar jobs, artificial intelligence is used to track how many keystrokes are given in a certain moment of time, what websites workers are browsing, in some cases the use of keywords on internal chats or emails, and flagging basically non-work related topics. So there's a lot of surveillance involved. There's also disciplinary power involved, in the sense that AI fires people in some cases when they don't perform well. We had a very horrible example just a few weeks ago in Italy, a food delivery rider that basically died on the job, was a day later was dismissed by the platform because he had failed to perform the delivery. So we see how these systems can work in a very problematic way. There is problems in terms of discrimination, automating CV scanning can embed in the systems the bias of the programmers, the biases of the data set, and risk replicating discrimination for the future and marginalizing communities for the future. This has been a documented case even in big tech companies that had to withdraw some of their systems because they didn't manage to root out the bias out of the system. So we can imagine all the systems that small, medium, or non-tech enterprises use and they lease from someone else, they can have huge problems and no one in the company is able to, let alone fix them, but they might not be even able to spot the problems. There is a problem connected to privacy at work. Many of these systems are extremely invasive, excessively invasive. In some cases, they aim at collecting information about the mental state of people, the emotional state of people. This is something that should be outright banned. It's completely inhuman that managers should know what people think before the workers even are aware that they are thinking certain thoughts. And this is something that these instruments purport to do. Then they are completely unreliable, but at the same time, they should not be in place anyway. And there is, of course, a risk to occupational health and safety. Again, the kind of stress that this continuous surveillance and monitoring can impose on people is extremely dire. And of course, there is stress related to the, and also strain related to the intensification of the workplace. So what we need is to make sure that we keep the good technology in place, but we root out all the systems that basically keep people under the service of technology. This is, again, no innovation. It's just a sort of digital taylorism that doesn't help anyone except for the companies that market these systems to draw data out of people.
Right. Thank you so much, Valerio. Clearly supporting the digital transformation while highlighting that social rights are being undermined at times, stating some very unfortunate examples over there. I'm going to come back to you in a moment, Valerio, but let me bring in Raul here from the Fundación Secretariado Gitano. Raul, how are you at the foundation trying to make digitalization work for the most in need?
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation into the forum. We are delighted to be here. I would like to really brief some context on the Fundación Secretariado Gitano. We are a non-profit organization in Spain. We are working for 40 years. We are, in fact, celebrating now the 40 years of the Fundación. And we are working to assure the social and economic rights of Roma people, to assure that they have a better life, to improve their lives. We deliver services in employment, education, social inclusion, and fight against discrimination. We also advocate for the public policies to be more inclusive, and we create raising awareness campaigns and reports and surveys on the situation of Roma people. We work especially practically in Spain. We are in 70 municipalities in Spain, and we work approximately with 30,000 people every year. Focusing on employment, 22 years ago now, and with the support of the European Social Fund, we launched the Acceder program, which is our employment program, and the focus was to work for the employment of Roma people, especially the salaried employment, as a gateway to social inclusion. And this program, after 22 years, has proved to be really successful, effective, efficient. We created, in fact, a report on the 20 years of the program, on the results and the impact. And there we saw that we have worked with more than 82,000 people in this time. 4 out of 10 people with, we must remember, low qualification, low education, etc., obtained a job in this program. So we have a lot of experience, and we are really concerned about the situation with the digital transformation, because we believe that it happens all the time that those in most vulnerable situations, the socially excluded, are the first ones that are going to suffer the possible problems and dangers of these changes.
Thank you, Raul, for this overview of what you are doing within Spain, widespread indeed. Stain, empowering people through skills is always the aim here, the goal. But what principles should technology follow to provide this?
I want to talk about the principles that I think should surround the technologies, because I think it's good to follow up on the intervention by Valerio. We haven't spoken to each other, by the way, but I think our interventions follow really nicely. We spoke about the benefits. Valerio spoke about some of the dangers, and I think I want to talk about some of the principles that should surround the development and the use of some of these technologies, so that they are used for good. And at the OECD, we've developed the OECD AI principles. I think AI is particularly interesting to focus on. I think a lot of the technologies that Valerio was referring to are also AI-based technologies. And these are technologies that are being developed very fast, they're improving very fast, and they're also beginning to be adopted very fast, or finding a way into the workplace, into our everyday lives. And so, in a way, the regulation runs behind on these things. That's not to say that there is no regulation. We already have anti-discrimination laws, we already have data protection laws, we already have product description laws, so all these things exist. But at the same time, AI is running ahead, and so at the OECD what we did is we developed the OECD AI principles, which have also been adopted by non-OECD countries, including at the G20. And I won't go through all the principles, but 5 of the principles are very interesting, I think, because they kind of give an indication of how AI should be used for good. And that's really what we want. We want AI to be used for good. We want AI to protect human rights, to promote human rights. And I think some of the principles that are really important by these technologies is, first of all, we should be transparent about these technologies, about the use of them. People should know when they are being used, and maybe consent should be sought as well. And these technologies should also be explainable. We should be able to explain to somebody why a certain decision has been reached, and then not only explain a decision, but the individual should have a right to contest that decision. What's also really important, of course, is the technologies themselves. I mean, Valerio referred to kind of facial recognition, emotional recognition technologies. Many of these are not robust, and some technologies could even be dangerous. And so we need to make sure that all these technologies are safe, robust, and secure. And I think the final point or principle, which is really important, is about accountability. And accountability needs to be very clear. Who is accountable in case something goes wrong? So these principles should guide where we go to, but I think regulation is really important, because the principles guide our behavior. They don't have any legal value in any way. We can't enforce them. So regulation is really important, and we need to make sure that our regulation is up to date. But it's not just about regulation. I want to add one final thing, which is about dialogue, social dialogue around these things. I think it's really important that social dialogue at the workplace, for example, when we adopt technologies, that is very important. Just a final thing I want to say, in these studies that we did, the surveys and the case studies, we generally find that people overall tend to be positive about technologies, but they're even more positive about them when there has been discussions about them at the workplace level, when their workers have been involved in the adoption of the technologies.
Thank you so much, Stijn, for pointing that out. Valerio, Stijn just talked about the need and importance of protecting social rights in the digital world. I want to give you a chance, the opportunity to elaborate on that at some points.
Thank you. So what I think it's essential is that these systems get audited and also controlled before they are put in place. And I have argued in many occasions that we should have a right to negotiate the algorithm. There should be a collective right. It should be trade unions, the NGOs, but most importantly, trade unions in the world of work, that algorithms, that negotiate the criteria that go in the algorithms before the algorithms are put in place, before the algorithms are even developed. In many cases, there is a problem of social literacy for engineers. They are not aware of the risk of their systems on working people. So we need to take digital innovation accountable to the social risk it creates. It is essential that we have more transparency, but it's also essential that we have more control on the systems that go in our workplaces and control our lives. Currently, the EU is discussing some instruments such as the Platform Work Directive or the Artificial Intelligence Act. The kind of solution and protection that this system introduced are not sufficient. In the past, 40 years ago, we decided that certain systems, including video camera in workplaces in many cases, could not be introduced in the workplace without the consent of the trade union or of public bodies. At the moment, the systems that the EU is trying to say to purport at best give a right to be informed and consulted about these systems. We need to have veto power. We need to have the ability to ban some of the systems that are unacceptable. And so we need to have an approach that doesn't treat a smart, a wearable device or something that can read emails or read facial emotions any differently from a video camera that goes in the workplace. There's no need why we should give a free pass to these systems while we regulated 40 years ago less invasive systems without any impact on productivity. So I think we should, again, be sure that social rights are there. There are mechanisms, social dialogue, collective bargaining is a mechanism to ensure that technological innovation corresponds to progress. We need to foster those systems without falling in the idea that any sort of limit to technology is going to be a limit on progress.
Thank you so much, Valerio, for adding and building on what Stein and the rest of the panel have mentioned here. Raul, we are, of course, at a forum organized by the EU. What can be done at the EU level to help your work, and also the national level? What comes to mind?
Well, I would like to share two ideas on that, two recommendations. The first one is related to the adaptation of the policies, of the activities, of the practices that are proposed for them to be more inclusive with those most vulnerable and excluded people. And I would like to share a brief example before. In the Acceder program, the employment program I was talking before, in 2017 we launched the Empleando Digital initiative. This was in collaboration with the Spanish Red Cross and Accenture, and funded by the European Social Fund and also Accenture. And there we wanted to bring the digital skills to Roma people. We wanted to get Roma people to improve their digital skills. So in order to do this, we tried, and we made it. We trained and raised awareness among our staff. We updated our methodology, and then we tested and piloted new trainings for our beneficiaries, the beneficiaries of our programs. And there we had to do a real out-of-the-box thinking to adapt our ways, the ways we were 20 years doing the work some way, and then we had to be able to think that low-qualified people, low-skilled people can be able to work in programming, for example. One of the initiatives inside this program was adjusting the training for Roma people to be able to become programmers. And right now, Roma people, and in fact, Roma women are working in Accenture as programmers, because we were able to say, okay, they don't really need a high degree education. What they need is a good training course that is able to do this. So this is what we are asking. We are asking for these adaptations in every proposal, in any policy that goes out of the European Union and of the countries, for them to be able to think, okay, and this that we are proposing, how should we adapt it for people that is vulnerable or socially excluded? And here comes our second proposal. And it's related to the presence of the socially excluded people in the funding instruments. Usually the funding instruments, we find that they talk about vulnerable people, and it is like that, it must be like that, that is really important. But not so often they talk about socially excluded people, and here I'm talking about people that has no access to electricity supply or water supply. So there must be done a real hard work, and it cannot be the short term. Sometimes, for example, we find some initiatives, we're talking about digital, for 1 year connectivity for socially excluded people for free. Okay, and what happens after that year? Because in 1 year you do nothing. You need long-term initiatives. So that would be our second proposal, to be more inclusive with the socially excluded people in those proposals.
Thank you so much. And as we are nearing this session, Raluca, let me actually ask you the same question about how your work can be supported on the national and EU level. What can be done at the national and EU level to assist you, to help your work?
Yeah, since our work is very much focused on supporting underprivileged children to reach their potential, I think that at European level, we do need a framework that marries digital inclusion to inclusion, social inclusion in general, because these two components can't be dissociated. We talked a lot during this discussion about the risks and opportunities that technology is bringing now, and we're just figuring out the strategies at European and national and local level, how to tackle this with the current workforce. And I think we can learn a lot from this, and we can take these principles and insert and integrate them in the educational system in such a way that we are preparing not the useless generation, as things seem to be at this point, because the educational system is not preparing the kids today and the teenagers to tackle all the challenges of the future, but the real next generation that has the digital literacy and capacity to navigate an environment full of ambiguity. That's true. That a generation that will be able to adapt. We have to accept that digital is an extension of us. And it's not only about what Valerio was saying, just building the social capacities of coders, but it's also about building the digital capacity of people who will not be involved in IT. Because all of us, to some extent, in our jobs already have different digital components, and we have to accept that even in low-paid jobs, low-qualification jobs, there will be a digital component to it. So I think what the Commission can do is to focus more than it has done so far on promoting digital literacy development as a social right, and to promote it in such a way that takes into account the challenges on the ground, especially after the pandemic, with the increasing number of children at risk of poverty and a lot of other adults falling in situations of difficulty.
Well, listening to all of you, as we are about to wrap up, perhaps we have some Slido questions as well. If they are, we can put them on screen. But it's very clear that all of you clearly are in agreement that the digital transformation brings many benefits, but clearly the risks have also been mentioned and highlighted here throughout this session. Here's a question, for instance. Digitalization tends to benefit employers, particularly by increasing efficiency/output. How can we ensure financial gains are also passed on to employees, Stijn?
This is a really important question. As I said during my presentation, technologies improve the productivity. And in fact, when you ask employers why they adopt technologies, it's because of productivity. It's because of competitiveness. But of course, the challenge is, how do you distribute the gains that you get from technology. And I think this is this is what we've been discussing so far. If you ask me about the future, I'm not worried about a future of massive technological unemployment. I'm worried about a future of massive technological inequality. And I think one thing that comes out of our research is that we're getting emerging evidence on wages, for example, and this is how workers would benefit from increases in productivity. And one thing that clearly matters is firm-level policies or sector-level kind of bargaining. So wherever there is these systems in place, there's a greater chance that workers will also benefit from the productivity gains that we get from technology.
Anyone else want to chime in that particular one? Unless we have some more. Valerio, perhaps, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. What I thought, what I just said about collective bargaining and collective negotiation also goes in that direction. A very good way and tested way to share productivity gains is through collective bargaining. This is why we need to foster social rights in concerning the digitalization of workplaces, not only to rein technology when it's undesirable, but also to share the profits and gains.
Let me bring in another question here from Slido, Anonymous. Social laws are not prepared for new challenges, he or she said, but they are becoming ineffective against old problems. So how do we make old systems sustainable again? Do we have any takers for that? I'm looking to around. Stein, you want to jump in here?
No. Go ahead first.
Well, no, I could say that sustainability is a really important issue, of course. And from our experience with the Roma community and working 40 years and 22 years in the employment, is the long-term perspective is really a must. And what we cannot do is try to answer to a huge revolution like the digital transformation with short-term instruments. So sustainability, you get it, I guess, by being able to use the money, so to say, on the long term, and being patient also, but also, of course, being flexible and really fast with the answers. We are in a position now where we have the opportunity now to be there before the real problem comes. Usually, when we fight inequality, we are like behind the problems. When the problems happens, then comes our organizations, and we go behind trying to solve it and trying to. But now we are in a situation where we can go before the problem. The problem really is problematic. But you get that with the proper funding in a long term.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to jump in? No.
No, it depends on time.
Well, clearly, and some of the questions I believe we've already answered. It says acquiring skills to use technology is great, but we don't discuss enough the outcome inequality. Not all are benefiting in the same way. What can the EU do? This is something that you have highlighted throughout the discussion. I think it's clear that this is a subject matter that's going to stay with us for quite some time. All the work that all of you are doing in this regard, Steenbrücke, Valerio Di Stefano, Raluca Negulescu Balac, and Raul Perez Gonzalez, obviously very pertinent, very timely, and keep the finger on the pulse in this regard to ensure that a fair digital transition is part of our future. Thank you for your input and participation. This is your applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
This wraps up the third and final breakout session, but we're not quite done yet. On the contrary, we will await the other two remaining breakout sessions to join us back here in the auditorium then for the closing remarks of this forum. That's in about 5 to 10 minutes. Until then, I'll see you back here. Thank you for your attention.